Hey there YouTube, my name is Esteban and this is Tech with Esteban. In this video we're going to be continuing the music reactive LED light strip. If you haven't already seen the very first video and demo, be sure to click on that right above. But if you already have, let's get right to it.
So now the next thing we need to do is actually create this thing called a function. So in layman's terms, what is a function? A function is simply a block of code that you want to execute or run at a certain point from whatever in your code, if that makes any sense. So to explain that a little further, it simply means that, for example, over here you have this onStart green block, correct? This is actually a function. So a function simply contains code that you want to run at a certain point, and MakeCode has a built-in ability to know that to call this function. So we call a function to run it. So we run a function at the beginning, and MakeCode takes care of doing that. Since this is a predefined function known as onStart, the very beginning of your program, it's automatically going to go over here to onStart and run every single individual line inside this area. Okay, cool. So let's start off and go down to advanced again, and we're going to create a new function right here and name it. See how they have lower camel case over here? So we're going to name it calibrate. Okay, so now let's move these things over, because that moved over for some reason, and let's get into the nitty-gritty details of the calibrate function. So first off, let's see, what do we need to do here? So for calibrate, we're going to create a variable called calibration complete. Okay, and we need to make sure that we actually set this variable in here, okay, to a Boolean condition, either true or false. So you're wondering, how do we get true or false in here? You can only put numbers inside this little box. That's all you can put in here. So we need to find an adapter, in other words. So let's go over to our, let's see, logic. If you can see here, we can actually set it from dragging it over here, and it highlights, you just put it in like that. It'll automatically snap in. Okay, so I can show that again. We're going to snap it right in. Boom. And we actually need to set this to false initially. So like I said, this only runs at the beginning of our program, and we need to have that variable set up for later. Now we also need to do one more thing, and that is actually set the value of another variable. So we're going to create this variable called samples, and we need to set this initially as 500. So now these two actually can go in here. I'll explain why in a second, but we're gonna head over here now, and we need to do another type of loop. So here's the cool thing. If we head over to loop, you'll see this thing called a repeat do loop. So essentially what this does is that it iterates or goes through the code that's in here a certain amount of times. Okay? So let's say you had 3 lines of code in here, 3 blocks, and you set this to 4 times. It'll do it once, then again, and lastly one more time for that 4th time. And once it completes that, the loop will end, and it will continue down to the next code below it. Okay? So what we're going to put in here is actually a variable, and we're going to set that to samples. Okay? Right there. So we're going to repeat the code in here 500 times as we have above. Okay? So it's going to take the value of samples. So let me show you again. If you go into the variables drop down, you can see all your variables right here, and this is where you get their values. Okay, you just drag this into any of these little ovals, okay? So awesome. Now that we've grabbed that, we know it's going to repeat 500 times, or whatever number you set it to. And what we need to do is actually change. So we're going to go over here, okay? And we're going to set change. So this means we can change the value of sample average, okay? Right there. So it's sample average is that number we initially set to 0. We can change it by a certain number, okay? So what we're going to do here is head over to input. So what we're doing with this code is we're taking a sample, and that means essentially we're taking the initial sound level, okay, of the microphone so that we can zero out the sound. So right now the microphone, let's say like normally is reading around 8, okay? It has a number value of around 8. So that's with no sound really playing, because there's residual sound around the microphone. So there's always sound in the environment. And there's noise, of course. But essentially, we need to zero or calibrate the microphone. So we go into input, and this is where you find all the blocks related to input, buttons, sound, sensors, everything in here. So you can hover over and you can see what everything does. But what we need right here is a sound level. So we're going to drag that over into the change by, okay? So now we know that we're going to change sample average by whatever the level of sound level is, okay? Awesome. And then by convention, typically we want to slow things down a little bit because it is real hardware. So we take something called a loop, and we go in here and you see a pause. This just means a delay. So it will pause the code once it completes something for a certain amount of time. So we're going to drag that over, put it right under change, and we're going to set this to 1 millisecond. Okay, very, very, very minor delay, but it helps with execution of code because sometimes things can be really quick. The computers are very fast. We don't want to skip over anything. So essentially, let's like recap over here. We have a function calibrate that we're going to call at one point. You haven't seen this call yet. It's going to set calibration complete, a new variable we created, to false, okay? So it's going to start as false initially. Then we're going to set another variable of samples, okay? We're going to create it right here and set it to 500, okay? And then the next step, this is going to go all in order, 1, 2, and the next step is this repeat block. So we're going to repeat 500 times. You see right here, it's going to get the value of samples, which is 500. And what is it going to repeat? It's going to repeat the code inside this block. So that's going to be change sample average by whatever the sound level is at that moment. Okay, and then we're going to go to the next line, pause for a millisecond, and then we're going to go back up until we reach 500 times. Okay, it's going to keep doing this sample average by sound level 500 times.
Alright, so if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up down below. And hey, maybe leave a comment if you felt like it was a great video or not. Just voice it down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks!